Welcome to the Meeple Syrup Show. Right. Welcome to the Meeple Syrup Show. Designers discussing design. We're episode 64 of Dice and Rondels. And we have not only Sen and myself, but our third host this evening is Brian Lewis. How are you doing, Brian?
I'm good. How are you tonight?
I am excellent. We took last week off, and apologies to any of our audience members that missed the memo and showed up and tried to tune in. But Sen was in Toronto, and I'm sure he's going to tell us a little bit about that because he was doing some playtesting.
Sure.
And,
I did that stuff too.
And I was actually celebrating my mom's birthday, and so she's moving to the Dominican in less than a month, so I needed to make sure I hung out with my mom before she moves far away on me. So sorry again for last week, but we're really excited. We have a fantastic show tonight, and before we get there, let's pick Brian's brain first and see, what have you been playing lately?
Tonight was game night, so tonight we played Dice City and Felix the Cat in the Sack.
Oh, right, I saw you posted pictures of that. What's that all about?
Yeah. Felix the Cat in the Sack is a Friedman Friese game, and it's a bidding slash kind of a bluffing game. What happens is all the players put one card down. You reveal one card at a time, and you're bidding. And if you pass, you take money that's on a card, and then the next card becomes revealed. And whoever wins the bid takes all of the cards. So the cards are points. So
Right.
your cards are points, and your money is points as well. So it's a combination of the two. So you have to be kind of strategic about how you bid. Because those are also your points. So it's a fun little game. Plays probably about 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, and plays up to 5 players, and a lot of fun. Fun little game.
And then Dice Town, you said you played?
Dice City.
Dice City, sorry.
Yeah, the new one by Artipia Games and AEG.
Yeah, AEG has the North American, I believe.
Right, and that is. Basically, every player has their own board. It's a 6x6 grid. 6x5 grid, and there's 5 different colored dice. You roll them all, you place them on the grid. A 1 through 6 spot for each color, and wherever it lands, that's the action you take. So the board has pre-printed already cards, and then you get goods and you buy new cards to put on your city.
Right.
So you're building up your city and making your engine more efficient to buy more advanced city tiles, and you can also ship goods to get points that way. It's just victory points, but plays in about 45 minutes to an hour, up to 4 players.
Okay. And that's a perfect game to talk about tonight, seeing as we're talking about dice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure what I thought yet. My initial play was I enjoyed it. I don't know if it will stay in my rotation.
An important designation, is that, like, sometimes when you put it back on the shelf, do you miss it, and then maybe it comes back. That's always an important test. Just so that everyone's aware, too, Sen might, on occasion, disappear because of his voice, just fighting something there. So especially just a heads up, if he disappears, he's hopefully not dying. He's maybe just getting himself a drink or something like that to stay alive. And for myself, I've been playing a variety of filler games, anything from Tides of Time. Been really enjoying that lately. Just got Bomb Squad Academy, so excited to have that finally, because that's designed by a couple Toronto friends of ours, Daniel Roque and Joshua Capel. And we got to play test that lot, so it's really fun to now see that game out in the wild. Just trying to get ready for the Meeple Syrup winter camp coming up. So I want to give that a shout out and a big thanks. We've received amazing response from sponsors. So
Yeah, tell
again,
us
on
about
the
the
show,
sponsors, man. We want to know the
yeah,
sponsors.
the sponsors have been wonderful, and it's been a lovely surprise. And I think it's from the relationships we've been building from the show, but also I think it shows something about the gaming community in general, and that's that people even will contact me and say, "How can I help?" Which is amazing,
Which it's
to
pretty funny
say
because
the least.
it's a very small, private little event.
Yeah, it's an invite only. We are going to offer day passes, so maybe we'll get a good response from that. The last time we did that, I organized an event in the area that was open to the public. We did have a lot more people show up than we expected. When we had pre-sold 7 tickets, and we had 225 people show up. So I don't know if we'll have that response again, but because it's a little pricier, because we're doing things like for the weekend people that are coming, their accommodations and food are all included. So we're trying this new model out of kind of like, what if you all went to winter camp together and everything was taken care of, nice and cozy, snuggled around the fire, have some meals, play lots of games. We'll have an area for designing and play testing prototypes, and we'll have an area for family-friendly games. Haba, we actually have a room that'll be designated to like Haba and kids games, and a lot of outdoor activities, weather pending. So it's going to be a really great time. And the donations, we've had a lot of games donated to the library because they want to encourage this event to happen from year to year. A few publishers have even said, like, I want to be there next year because it could be a real nice, intimate way to see designs.
Mm-hmm.
And then also they're already kind of investing ahead. And then many also have sent duplicates and said make those play to wins or prizes. So we have a lot of games that we're going to be giving away to a small crowd. So
Yeah,
maybe
it's
everyone
gonna
will
be good
walk
times.
away with something. So
Yeah.
I
And
love those kind of
it's
times.
inexpensive too. At least, I mean, I think for 2 nights and meals, I mean, I guess I have the U.S. exchange rate in my favor, but
Yeah,
Sure,
a
sure,
little
but
bit.
we like to think
Today was
it's
the
very
lowest it's been
affordable.
since 2004, I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
So it's really low.
So we're happy that our friends from the south are taking advantage of
Yeah,
that.
yeah. It's really rare that they come this far north, so it's nice to
Yeah,
see
and
them.
that's one of the other perks is we're really appreciative of actually being able to run something where people kind of come to us because we spent all year running around going to everywhere else. So it'll be nice to have something kind of in the Northeast. But I don't want to prolong any longer our guests because we have two all stars on the show who are making games like no other. Maybe as much close to the Bamboozle brothers on pace. They're maybe like Bamboozle Juniors. But we have Ben Pinchback and Matt Riddle, and I just want to welcome back to the show. We're really glad you're here.
Hey, it's great to be here. How you doing?
It's
Good,
good to have
good.
you.
We're
Excellent.
excited because we're gonna dive in. We got an episode of all designers here. We do a variety of shows. We sometimes have, promoters or publishers on, but now we have a 5-person discussion of just straight on design. So
Right,
we
we
want to
haven't had this
focus
in a while.
on dice, then Rondels, and then the combination of those. Because I know you
Rondels.
two are doing some special stuff there. But before we get there, let's stick with dice first. What are some of the, and I'm going to just throw this right off at Ben, right to start us off, but what are some of the benefits and cons to using dice in game design?
Well, I think one of the easiest benefits right away is obviously going to be the randomness. You listen to Ludology with Jeff Engelstein. You listen to them talk a lot about input randomness and output randomness, and dice let you do both. And there's a lot of cleverness lately. It used to be growing up that dice was all output randomness. So I'm going to attack Sen, and we're just going to roll dice and see if
Please
I
don't.
win or
Please
not.
don't.
And that
You're
was
in
what we grew
Australia.
up
I'm
with.
hunkered down in Australia.
Right. That's what we grew up with. We each put half our forces in one half of Australia, and we rolled dice at each other and figure out who's going to win. And that was the output randomness, and that was really fun. And there's even something to be said about that. Today, King of Tokyo, it's fun to roll claws at each other. But I think what from a more of a hobby game perspective, what we've been seeing a lot of the last 5 years is that input randomness, where you're going to roll dice and they're going to randomly generate a scenario, but then your players are going to get to handle that scenario and react to it, like the Kingsburg Alien Frontiers type of thing, where you're going to roll dice initially and they're going to set the stage for a player turn, and then you're going to have to be creative and clever on what you're doing with that randomness that's generated. So that space is kind of new, and it's really exciting, and it just gives players like a really fun puzzle to solve turn to turn, and that's something me and Matt have been trying to get into a lot lately.
Very cool. I think Brian, you're next.
Yeah. So with I think one of the I have to admit, when I first started gaming, I went heavy Euro, and I hated dice games because it was so random, and I was like one of those, like, oh, everything I roll is either a 1 or a 6, or whatever die I needed I never got. And so it was hard to mitigate that. And as I went along, I think that one of the games that actually kind of turned me around was Castles of Burgundy. I just thought I never felt like I couldn't do something, and even if I rolled a bad die, there was some way to mitigate that. So that kind of turned me around, and now I really do get into I'm getting more into the dice, and enjoying them for its randomness, as long as there's a way to mitigate that. So I think that's one of the main complaints that people have about dice games is the randomness, but that's some things that people love about it as well. So I think you're on both sides. You kind of got a split there between those types of gamers.
It's cool, Brian, you bring up Castles of Burgundy, because as a game, it's not my favorite, but the dice mitigation that you mentioned is beautiful, and
right.
we learned that lesson from Castles of Burgundy specific, and the way, I don't know if they're called workers in that game or whatever you get to move the dice one value up or down,
right.
One pip up or down, and that was just brilliant, and it changed the game for us, and we've kind of borrowed that quite often in our dice game sense. It's just a really nice way. You can manage your risk, right? You can go in blind on one roll, or you can go in knowing that if I need to, I can move that number up, 1 or 2. So it's really cool.
Yeah, agreed. So, what about you, Matt? What with your dice games, or with what? I guess the question is, what dice games is your favorite? To cut it short.
Yeah, my favorite dice game. I'm kind of like you. It took me a long time to get used to the idea that dice were okay in a game.
Right.
I didn't like them at all. I didn't like the randomness. And then, like you said, you began to see this design shift towards, what you're really doing is it's a worker, for example, right? All those dice worker games. Even though I think the dice placement in Marco Polo is actually a small part of the game, it's used very well, and that's one of the games I've really enjoyed lately that use dice in a very specific way. I would say my favorite, and only because I think it's super clever the way it's done, and it's not really a dice game, but it's a game that uses dice as like an action selection mechanic, is Bora Bora. I mean, it's a very heavy game, but the reality of it is, right, you're rolling your pile of dice at the beginning of your turn, and then you're doing a very, very fun, very tight action selection with those dice. And there's a really kind of, the idea that, okay, if I put my low number here, well, that thing's closed now, but I get a lesser action, and that sort of push and play between picking the one that you want, using the dice that you rolled, and then blocking for somebody else is a really neat thing. So I like dice in that setting more so than, say, a truly dice-driven game. I played a few like Roll for the Galaxy, which is in Nations, and Discoveries, which were all pretty good in their own way, which are much more dice-heavy, but I generally prefer the dice as kind of a flavor to an overall design as opposed to the primary driver.
Mm-hmm. Let's look at a game that is where the primary driver is dice, like Las Vegas, so Rudiger Dorn's Las Vegas, where it is, if you thought about it and you think about the game itself, if you've played it, it is exactly the opposite of what gambling should be, really. I mean, it's you roll your dice, and then you decide where to place things, and based on the outcomes of how people place, then you get your payout. But it's such a much more satisfying game as an actual game where you actually have a decision than rolling and just getting something because you rolled really well. We often have the joke, the inside joke with Jay and I is, oh, to do better at that game, all we need to do is roll sixes more, right? And so there's games that aren't like that. And I think that's where the idea of the input randomness versus output randomness really comes into play, that the more control you can have over the outcome of your dice, the better it is, even though the dice may be static and locked into position after you do your first action. And it's the then what is the question, right? So how have you guys been addressing the use of dice in your own particular designs, Ben?
Well, to take a left turn, one thing we've been talking about the Euro output randomness and mitigating and strategy and all this. Well, we just came out with a game with Eagle Griffin this year called Floating Market. And we used the polyhedral nerd dice you're used to seeing in like role-playing games.
That's a great.
We kind of went against everything we hold dear, and so we love these Bora Bora type games where you're like, okay, roll dice and then kind of deal with it and be clever and outthink the other person. Well, we decided to table that, and we made a complete output randomness like crazy roll game where you do exactly the thing we should all hate, where you place workers and do all these things for a couple minutes. And everybody puts a D12 or a D10 or a D6 in or whatever, and you could have up to, I don't know, 10 dice in the pool if by the time you add all the mods in. And then you just roll all the dice and add them up and go, hey, Daryl gets bananas because it rolled 27. Hey! And but somehow it's really fun.
I was just going to say, there's a real fun factor there. I mean, that's like a Stone Age even, right? Like there's that element of you can do a little bit of the math, a little bit of the percentage, but then there's still that factor of, oh, I rolled awesome, or I didn't, and there's excitement.
Exactly. And the whole point of the game is it's not supposed to be super serious. Like you do your little strategy and try to mitigate it all.
Yeah.
But if I'm playing with my 10-year-old, he can still roll crazy and get the fruit and, oh my gosh, hey, and everyone's having a good time. Like, you just have to play it in that spirit, and that was the purpose of the design. So when I see a review that someone didn't like it because it's too random, it's like, that's okay.
Yeah, that was the point.
That's the point. Like, that was the entire point. We were trying to make Euro gambling, we're always looking for that game where you're sitting at a con and people a couple tables over go, whoa!
Yeah,
just some crazy rolled. I don't know.
Nice. All right, I got another question back at you, Matt. I'm noticing a bit of a trend, and it's been happening for a few years. But there seems to be a game comes out, and then the dice version comes out. What do you think of that, and why do you think that trend's going to continue? Tell me a little bit what you think about that.
I do, for a couple reasons. Ben and I joke around all the time about making fleet dice, and we probably will make fleet dice, because why wouldn't you, right? I think it's a trend based solely on economics. I mean, there's certain games, like, for example, Nations, the dice game I played, but I've never played Nations, but I can't imagine there's anything in Nations, the dice game, that really ties that strongly back to Nations, because Nations is such a large game. But then I played Discoveries, which to me was a very small flavor of Lewis and Clark, but was a standalone game all by itself with a really good, use of dice. And there's a shared dice mechanic that's really clever, where you kind of put, you take dice of other people's. It's at risk. They can take it back at any time. So I think, to answer the question, yeah, I think it's fine. I mean, I think there's marketing behind it. I think there's value in, for the designers and the companies. I mean, if you have a successful game that's popular and can, sort of support a spin-off, right? So first thing you're going to do is do a, expansion, and then if that's still successful, then hey, why not do a dice game? I mean, people like your theme, they like your setting, they like your thematic setting, then yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you can come up with a good game for it, don't just call it whatever dice and make some crappy game, but if you do a good job on the design, do it.
I think sometimes, sorry, Daryl, I was just going to say, sometimes the dice game ends up surpassing and even outshining the base game. Like Bang the Dice game is one I can think of.
Absolutely.
That's a great example, yeah.
Can't go back.
Oh, absolutely not, yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that the dice game? Do you think they come out with the dice game because it is a perceived, whether warranted or not, perceived easier, more lightweight version of the heavier game? Like Nations, the dice game, Lewis and Clark, then Discovery's Lewis and Clark, the dice game. Is it, whether it's warranted or not? Do you think people perceive that as a lighter version of the heavier game they enjoy?
I have a feeling there's something to that psychology, just that people want to play something like Nations. Oh, but we don't have 2.5 hours to do it. Let's grab Nations, a dice game. I want that, that 4X kind of feel. Same thing with, any of the the dice game versions. A lot of them are flavorfully or in the world of, and it kind of scratches that little itch for that little while. And, that said, I mean, everybody loves rolling dice. Pretty much everybody loves rolling dice.
And you can actually even see it from the reverse, because I think, for instance, My Village, that's coming out in North America, it's a dice version of The Village, and it's actually heavier than the original game, and a lot of people are thrown off by that. I saw a lot of people that kind of sat down and went, "Oh wow, this game's going to take longer than Village." Like I didn't think that was coming.
I think as a designer too, you're comfortable in that setting, right? You know your mechanics, you know your, how the game interacts. You've got it's.
Oh no!
Genius thought.
Well, we'll wait for him to reconnect.
He's kind of like this. But yeah, actually, I just got a question online from Sir Bob, who asks, "Is Belfort dice lighter than Belfort?" And the answer is yeah. It's about a third of the time. Maybe it's about a 45-hour game instead of a 2.5-hour game. Okay. But it can handle up to 5 players. It's much faster. And actually, it's funny because Matt's here, which is great. Matt Loomis is on, and I have to thank Matt actually for the initial inspiration for Belfort Dice, even though he probably doesn't know this. Is I was playing his game with one of the games that he designed with Isaac Shalev, and it inspired us to think, well, what about Liar's Dice, and how could that be something that we use in Belfort Dice? Because we've been thinking about Belfort Dice for years, and it just kind of triggered it, like, hey, let's do it this way. And it eventually, migrated way away from the whole Liar's Dice mechanic that Matt and Isaac were using for something else. But in the end, yeah, a lot of it is because people keep asking us to make a Belfort the Dice game, because they like the world.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of coming up with a similar sort of, it's not necessarily area control, but it's majorities, it's building in, it fits in with the storyline, it's after the Yeti's attack and all that kind of stuff. So it fits.
Let's try to go back, Matt. You seem steady now on the feed. What were you saying before you chopped up on us?
No, I just think that as a designer, frankly, it's a little bit easier to design a dice game of your own game because you're comfortable with the world and you're comfortable with the mechanics and you're comfortable with the way the primary drivers of your games interact. So then you take dice, and like Ben said earlier, you do as input, you do as output, and you decide, okay, how are we going to, make this version of our game that we already know so well? Not to say that it's easier to design, but I think there is a little bit of a less barrier of entry. So from the perspective of a designer, hey, why wouldn't you do it? It's going to be fun. We love Fleet, for example. Again, use that as an example. Sen and Jay love Belfort. Why wouldn't we go back to that world and design a game around it?
Exactly. So, we're talking about dice and how, the randomness and how to mitigate that randomness. Let's kind of switch gears and go to Rondels, which, by their nature, don't have any randomness. There are some games that have a little bit of random. Rondel, Finca comes to mind. But, for the most part, you've got this circle there with pre-programmed actions. And how do you use that successfully in a game? I'm going to ask Ben. Can you think of a game that you think really successfully uses a Rondel? And what do you like about the Rondel mechanic?
Well, I'll tell you my favorite Rondel ever is actually in a game that's only okay, because the second half of the game I don't like that much, is the Stronghold game Milestones.
I've never played it.
It's Stefan Dora, one of my favorite all-time
You own
designers.
it?
Yeah,
I think
for
I
sure.
played Milestones at your house, son.
It's Stefan Dora and a co-designer. The genius is everyone has their own personal rondel,
Mm-hmm.
and it changes. So you
That sounds like a
build
Depeche Mode song.
personal rondel.
Yeah, your own personal rondel.
So it's just beautiful. You have these actions, gathering resources, etc., that you place in a circle basically, and you change them, and it's really slick how you have to interchange them, and they're constantly in flux. You can't just have the same rondel the whole game, so it's always changing. You have to manage that, and it's super brilliant. And as your little person goes around the rondel and whatever, it's very satisfying until you take all those resources you gain and go off to the board, which is actually very boring. So the second
Well, hey.
so the second half of the game isn't terribly good, but I love that changing personal rondel that they came up with. It's always inspired me.
Yeah. I think for me, I guess if he deserves a title of Master of the Rondel is Matt Gertz.
Matt Gertz.
I got to hang out with him at Essen. I have some stories for the after show.
Well, you were just name dropping, are we?
Yeah, you know it. Gertz, what's
when I was hanging with my buddy Dave at game night, I have yet to play a game of his that I didn't like, but that's what he's known for, and he's good at it. So if you're good at it, why not do it? But have you guys played Finca?
Yeah, I love Finca.
Mhm.
Finca's an awesome game.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's a game that I like that whole mechanic of having that variable rondel, So that's a game.
I think, Brian, what you're saying about the Matt Gertz games that I find so fascinating, like in Navigador and stuff, is it's a really nice way to provide different actions for the player, but to limit the frequency they can take the action.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
So as you trek around the thing, you're going to get to do this certain action a certain amount of times, but I have to do X, Y, or Z before I get to the point where I can slam this other action again. So it makes me spread out and do different things, and it's a really clever way of making players do that.
Right, and then as you space out, some actions have multiple points in your rondel or whatever as your rondel grows or things like that. Then that action is less powerful, but you might need to do it more, and so you can actually balance. It's almost like a hand balance of cards. It's funny. Somebody actually said, and this is a really neat way of looking at it. Let me just see who said it, because it should be attributed. Oh, it was Sir Bob. Sir Bob said that Monopoly is a rondel, and it really kind of is, right? The roll and move around the board, and every time you hit something, you do something. It's just that that's all the game is going around this rondel, versus rondels as we know them, where you go around the rondel and affect a greater board. So how are you guys using rondels? I know that last time we talked, at Gen Con, we had talked about dice dells and dicey or whatever. I can't remember.
The Rondel.
The Rondel.
That's it, the Rondel. So
Also a brand of tomatoes here in the U.S.
Is it really? Why don't you tell us about the?
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so the Rondel actually, very appropriate to the show, is combining dice and a rondel. So the idea basically is we've used it in a couple different spots, but I think the one that's probably the most imminent is a game called Alcazar that's coming out with Dice Hit Me Games next year. And what we use the dice for is almost to set up like a little puzzle each turn. So you're going to roll in the case of that game 4 of your own dice, and you use those dice to move around the rondel. And then when you land on whatever spot you land on the rondel, you pick a second dice to activate that location. And each of the locations around the rondel is actually, in the case of Alcazar, kind of its own little Euro puzzle. And there's different things you can do. You can collect resources. And that game actually has an inner ring and an outer ring. It's like a double rondel, so that you can use one guy to collect resources. The other guy kind of spends them at the different spots around the rondel. So we call it a roll-del, haha. And it's super fun because, like you've said, the rondel provides you with this limited action selection. So you cannot get to every spot you got to do a little bit of work to get back around to where you want to get to. So you have to make these choices along the way. Like, okay, if I move a little bit farther but take a less efficient action or an action I don't want as much, so I can get to the action I really want quicker, or do I take an immediate action in the meantime and take an extra turn to get back to where I want to get to? So that mechanic of the inherent mechanic of the rondelle works very well. And then what, again, Ben and I's kind of twist on it is adding the upfront dice to sort of add this kind of puzzle feel to it. And it works really well, honestly, because you get this, you've got a pair of actions. You're going to do 2 things on this turn. And you have to use 2 dice each action. So which 2 spots am I going to go to? Which dice am I going to move with? Which dice am I going to activate with? And it's allowed us to really kind of use that same mechanic in different ways and actually a few different designs that we've got kind of in different spots of development. So that's kind of our twist on it. It's a lot.
That sounds really cool. I think there's a few people playing around with hybrid rondelles. One I've got to at least play test with why am I drawing a blank? Tasty Minstrel. Jaffe, thank you, Seth.
He's got his game with Templars. That's custom rondelle.
Yeah,
so
that's it's a really nice, unique rondelle system where you're actually upgrading the slots, and so then over time, each person's rondelle it's almost like a deck builder, but of a rondelle. So I mean, we're seeing these different kind of combinations of using mechanics and layering them. I'm curious, Ben, have you seen other examples of rondelle combos or kind of unique uses of rondelles?
I think you just mentioned the one I was thinking of. Did Bottlecap Vikings just do that too with the changing rondelle?
I haven't played that.
Rondelle? Was that what that one was too, Matt?
Yeah, it's got a. I don't know that it. I think it changes at the beginning of the game. I'm not sure it changes during the game.
I think I might be thinking the one you just mentioned that Seth is working on with the rondelle. You kind of evolve over the course of the game. That's a super interesting.
It's basically you flip the sections of the rondelle, so there's like a more powerful side if you invest in it.
Hey, what do you guys think about using a set number of movements on the rondelle versus a random number of movements? What do you think? Is there better play with?
Is there some rules that you think people
I
should stick to?
I generally prefer, if you're not going to do it, not completely randomly, but I like a range. Like I just played Queen's Architect, which is almost really good, but I can't place why I didn't love it. Like I was enjoying everything I was doing, but at the end it wasn't satisfying, so I ended up really mixed on it. But it does a thing where you basically get 1 to 3, right? So you know that it's going to take me at least 3 turns to get do a full circle if I do 3 every time. But again, the reality of it is I don't necessarily want the 3rd action round each time. So I'm trying to think of, is Navigator fixed? Is it?
It's fixed.
It's fixed.
Can't you pay to go past your two or whatever it is? It's been a long time since I played Navigator.
There might be a mitigated, like a cost to reach farther than you naturally want. So there's that built-in kind of like punishment.
Right. I like a range because it gives me choices. I like choices.
For sure. Ben, what do you think of like examples like Trajan, where they kind of use a Mancala? Is a Mancala a rondelle, or another example might be like Glenmore? Do you see like how Glenmore is a rondelle because it's like these limited choices going around? What are your thoughts on those?
I'm going to say no on Glenmore. You're talking one of my other favorite designers, and
he has Kraftwagen that uses the same.
Yeah, I'm going to say no because you don't come back to the same action again. It's always changing in Glenmore. If I jump ahead to Loch Ness or Loch Oiki or whatever, when I get back around the circle, it's going to be completely different. So I'm going to go no on that one. Trajan, you could abstract talk me into maybe almost being a rondelle. It's just that you're not one space and time necessarily, but there is that puzzle about I'm here, I have cubes here, and I want to get over here for this action. And Trajan's one of Matt and I's favorite games of all time, both of us, and it's always inspired us in that method of on the back end you don't want to kind of ruin it like milestones, but as long as on the back end you have decent satisfying Euro stuff going on, if you give players that initial puzzle, it's almost fascinating. Like, I want to do these like things I'm familiar with, but in my way is this amazing puzzle, and that's what Feld is super good at, especially if you look at Trajan, and that's what we were trying to do when we talked about the Rondel. We were talking about like, here, roll 4 dice. In between 4 dice, you have to make 2 pairs where you're going to move with the die and activate with the die. And by the way, we're also going to give you 2 different people to choose to move, and that's like, we're just giving you this little puzzle that hopefully is very satisfying to then go do things you're very familiar with. So
Yeah.
Totally.
So, Matt, one of my favorite designers, Uwe Rosenberg. I think you can say he kind of redesigned the Rondel in a different way, where it was for resource management. If you've played, have you played Glass Road?
I have.
So what did you think about that? What did you think about that use of the Rondel in limiting what you can do based on the number of resources you have?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess I didn't think of Glass Road as Rondel simply because I kind of see where you're going, and it's very interesting the way he does the push and the pull of like the brick and the clay, right? So you work very hard to move the resources that you want off the front end of your sort of time, like look like the hands of a clock, right? And that allows you to then open up more brick and clay.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think of that as a Rondel, though, simply because I'm not necessarily using that circle to select what I want to do as much as I am activating the board full of actions to then pull resources off. So it's interesting. It's a fantastic game. I love managing the wheel.
Right. Do you think that might be like a variation of the Rondel, or do you not? I'm just curious what your thought on that.
No, I do. I actually don't think it is, only because I think really what it is a way to do resource conversion in a different way. So what he basically did is he took what could have been a chart, a spreadsheet, anything, and then kind of put it on that wheel so that as you begin to spend certain resources, it creates other resources.
Gotcha.
So, and you're not really doing that circle, really. You're just sort of opening up spaces to create the back-end resources that you need to score points and build better buildings. I mean, it's a fantastic game, and whatever that thing is completely unique.
that unique kind of thing that already exists already.
That
but
non-Rondel thing.
Exactly.
Right.
Ben, what are your thoughts on having individual Rondels per player versus having a big group one that everybody goes around? Pros and cons.
I love the individual Rondel, and I guess the pro in that is I think it gives players the feeling that they've built their system, and maybe replayability would be higher, because if I'm building this personal Rondel for myself, and if it's a little modular even, I can attack the game many different ways. I could try a stone-heavy strategy one game and try a wood-heavy, or a balanced strategy the next game. And if it's a shared Rondel, it's going to be a little harder for me to specialize and customize and try a lot of different paths to victory. So if you're going to play the game a lot, then I think it would really benefit from that personal, even customizable one. But it might be harder to affect the competition, though, too. So the con would be that when everyone's kind of in their own little personal space, you just have the propensity to not pay attention to everybody else as much, versus when there's one focused shared area. Even if I can't block you, I'm still more inclined to pay attention to the common area and maybe be more aware of what you're doing and maybe deny you some contracts you're trying to fulfill or something like that. Versus if I'm just in my own little Rondel, it might just be multiplayer solitaire. Would maybe be a con of the personal. Yeah.
I was stuck on mute there. I was thinking about that. That was nice. So I want to hear more about this Rondel. You got my brain also exploding with the possibilities. What are some of the ways that you two are kind of dabbling with this mechanical hybrid? Where are you going with it?
So I think it started with Alcazar, like we talked about, where you're basically using four of your own, two versions of it, where you use four of your own dice and you use that in pairs to kind of do that puzzle of move and then activate. We've also taken it in a much lighter level, in sort of a game where basically each player, you roll 4 dice at the beginning, like Ben mentioned earlier, input randomness, and then you go in a circle, each selecting that dice, and you move around a circle to collect different cards for different cards to make sets and things like that. Those are probably the two that we're working on the heaviest.
Well, we also have the other one, Matt, where you still do 2 actions in a round, but every player only rolls 2 dice, and the game rolls a die. So that die we colored red just to set it apart. So in a round, the game, the board will roll a die, and if it comes up 6, then and I roll my 2 dice and I get like a 5 and a 1, then my 2 actions are going to use that board die which rolled 6, and then my 5, and the board die 6, and my 1. So I have to plan my 2 actions around using that board die, both times. That's kind of a different take on the Rondel that we're working with another publisher. We haven't announced or signed with them yet, but it's looking like maybe next year we're going to be working on it a lot more. And then we took it one more time, heavier, a game we haven't finished yet, but we have actually started color coding the dice. So you do that whole puzzle we've been talking about, and I take my 4 dice and I break them into sets of 2, so I move with one and activate with the other. But now it matters the color of the die you activate with. So like if I move 6 with a die around to here and then activate with a 4, if it's a blue 4, it does something versus if it's like the green 4, and that's kind of like.
Right.
I don't
know. That one actually
Nice.
is cool because that has a group roll. So the start player rolls the 4 colored dice, and you
Yep.
all use those dice. You just take turns. Like you don't actually move them, so they're available to everybody, and your actions are based on those dice. So I may use my blue dice to move, and the red dice to activate, and Ben may use the red dice to move, and the black dice to activate. So it kind of makes this. It takes away that sort of, oh, well, you rolled all. Granted, all of it, we're smart. We're not going to make 6.
Sure. No, it's kind of like the cube tower that Feld uses for the. Would that be a fair?
Kind of like it gives everybody what their ability, what their inputs are this round, and then you can all use them in your own way.
For sure.
So Ben, we're coming up on the close of the show here, and so we want to ask you, what advice do you have for new designers that are designing with dice? What are the challenges that you've seen? What is a trap that they might fall into? And just in general, what advice do you have when designing with dice?
I think, dice are so awesome. Everybody loves rolling dice. I think the first question you have to ask as a designer is, what experience do you want to create for your players? Do you want a heavier game or do you want a lighter game? Because that's going to drive you toward what we were talking about, the input randomness or the output randomness. If you want a lighter kind of hey-oh crazy game, then you lean a little more towards the output randomness. I'm going to do these things and then roll dice and see what happens. And then if you want a more thinky game, then you got to go a little more swayed towards the input randomness, where you kind of roll dice to set the stage and then let players figure out what they're going to do with that. So figure out the weight of your game, I would say, that you're going for up front, and then kind of go from there.
So on that note, this is a kind of a chicken and the egg kind of thing. Which comes first for you when designing with dice, theme or mechanic?
Lately, I'd say the last couple of years, we've been doing a lot better job of setting our stage early, with theme and with playtime in mind. That's kind of been the things we've been starting with lately. Is one of us will come up with a pretty cool theme, and we're kind of feeling the weight of the theme. This should be like a 50-minute type of game. So a theme and a playtime, and then maybe some mechanics follow shortly after that can support that.
Awesome.
Excellent. So, Matt, let's talk about Rondels then. What advice would you give to a novice designer who, likes Matt Gert's games or games that have Rondels in them and wants to design their own? What's the piece of advice that you would tell them?
Make it different. I mean, Matt Gertz has done, I think, 5 Rondel games. Feld's done 2 or 3. So it's out there. And that doesn't mean you can't do it, but make sure there's something, if you put an action circle up on the corner of the board, we move around it in a circle, nothing else is happening that's different, well, then I'm not really sure why, unless there's there's something really neat going on over here, then I feel like you should, put your own spin on it. Take a look at it, figure out how to make it clever and unique, and then make it stand out, so that when people play that game, they can see, oh, that's really neat. He did this new thing with that Rondel. Like we've been talking about with Ben and I with the dice, and Seth Jaffe was sort of the changing, where you kind of establish your Rondel, and then Milestones, again, like Ben said, great game, where you sort of set your own personal Rondel, below average on the back end, but still. So that's just do something different, do something new, do something neat. So it stands out and is interesting for all of us guys that play a million games every year, and we want to find something new and cool.
Excellent, thank you.
Excellent stuff. All right, well, I just want to again thank Ben and Matt. I don't know if they'll be sticking around for the after show, but we do want to invite everyone. Please check out the after show. We'll sometimes leak the link right away, but you can always find it.
Well, it
posted
actually
by
automatically
Friday.
leaks now because I think it's tied to our Twitter.
Oh, haha, even better. So you can find the link. It is posted. The idea was to spread out the content, so feel free to check out the after show and see where the conversation may go. I want to say a special thanks and recommend people check out both Matt and Ben's games. They are exploding all over the place. We talked a little bit about floating markets, but we didn't talk about Morocco, which is out there. What else is brand new?
Wharfside and Floating Market are the ones that are currently Fleet Wharfside. It's a Fleet spin-off. It's a little bit lighter of a card game, but still got really good decisions. And Floating Market out there now. Morocco will be out probably late spring, maybe Origins Gen Con time. It's for sale. It kickstarted, and then we got Back to the Future coming out in March.
Yeah, well, definitely. Well, if you guys are part of the after show, we might have to go off track and talk about that a little bit. But
yeah, I can hang out for a bit.
Excellent. All right, so stay tuned for that. And I also want to give a shout out for next week's episode. We have a really great episode. We have Richard Ham confirmed to come on, and we have Efka from No Pun Included, and we might also have, fingers crossed, Rodney is getting back to me, and Eric Martin. We're going to talk about what kind of best designed games of the year, kind of a review of what they saw from all of their different perspectives. So stay tuned for that. If you have questions or if you have games that you think were the best designed games, let us know on Twitter, and we can make a case, or you can make a case, for why that game should win. So we'll have a big discussion about that on next week's episode. But meanwhile, we just want to encourage you, keep making great games, and we look forward to playing your games soon. Have a good night.